My whole point is to protect Forrest, to make sure that his needs are met, and I don't think Sheena can do it.
You are living on daydreams and living on the thought of love and happy homemaker and being a little.
I love your son, and I'll do anything my best for him.
Love doesn't pay the bill.
I love Sheena so much, but I can't help thinking that my mom is right.
I'm in love with you, but I do still have feelings for her too. That was the sentence that stripped all the soft excuses away and left the whole relationship exposed in one ugly second. Because once a man says he loves you while keeping another woman alive in his heart, the problem is no longer confusion, bad timing, or one disrespectful message. The problem is that you were never standing in a safe place to begin with. And you can see why this hit Trisha so hard. Because this was not some casual flirtation getting messy at the edges. This was a relationship moving through family meetings, future talk, and emotional promises, while a door from the past was still sitting half open the whole time. That is what makes this moment sting more than a normal reality TV breakup. The confession sounds sudden, but the damage behind it feels old. It raises a harsher question right away. Did Rick destroy the relationship
I've
with
chosen
one sentence,
Sheena
or
to be
did
my
that
wife,
sentence
and
only
you need to
reveal
trust
what
my
it
decision
for a
as
while?
her.
That
Stop
Trisha was
thinking with your
investing in
pecker
a
and start
future
thinking with
a
your
man
brain.
who still had unfinished business where it mattered most. In my opinion, that is why the line lands like a final blow instead of a random twist. It does not create the danger, it confirms it. And the worst part is that Rick still tries to present himself like a man caught in a sad situation instead of a man facing the consequences of divided loyalty. He wants the pain of the moment to feel tragic, but Trisha's reaction makes the bigger truth impossible to ignore. This was not only about an ex, it was about trust, respect, and whether she was ever fully chosen at all. So before the fallout explodes, the story pulls back to Rick alone in the hotel room, looking around like the place still holds something tender, trying to turn memory into proof that this love was real. But once you know what he admits later, even that quiet little trip down memory lane starts to look less like romance and more like cover for something much uglier waiting underneath. Rick sits in that hotel room and starts talking like he is walking through some beautiful love story, like those first days with Trisha were full of warmth and promise, but that version falls apart the second you hold it next to what was shown. This trip was not some pure little romance ruined at the end by one bad reveal. The strain was there early. The mistrust was there early. The instability was there early. So when Rick starts sounding nostalgic, it does not come off as sweet. It comes off like cleanup. People do this all the time when consequences catch up. They reach back into the past, pick out a few softer details, and try to rebuild the emotional setting so their behavior looks less ugly in the present. That is why the airport detail matters so much. Trisha did not only get upset, she reached a point where getting away from him felt safer than staying near him. She changed her flight. She refused to travel back with him. She stopped speaking to him. That is not small relationship tension. That is someone hitting a wall and deciding distance feels better than proximity. And once a relationship gets there, the issue is no longer one argument or one misunderstanding. The trust structure is already cracked. What makes Rick harder to believe in this moment is not only what he did, but how he frames it after. He keeps leaning towards sentiment instead of injury. He keeps sounding like a man who wants the audience to feel the sadness of the fallout, not the full weight of what caused it. That is the trap in this whole section. He is trying to make the story feel tragic when Trisha is living it as betrayal. And even with her changing flights, cutting contact, and making it clear how deep the damage runs, Rick still does not sound like someone who fully gets what he broke. He sounds like someone standing in the ruins, still trying to negotiate the size of the fire. Then Rick does what people like Rick always do when the facts start cornering them. He shrinks the crime so he does not have to face the full meaning of it. He starts framing the issue like this was about bad timing, bad judgment, maybe a disrespectful reply at the wrong moment, but that reading falls apart the second you apply basic logic to his own words. Because if this ex still mattered enough for him to hide the contact, defend the contact, and protect the contact, then the real problem was never the timing of the message. The real problem was that the connection was still alive in a place that mattered. You do not go secretive over something emotionally finished. You do not get defensive over something you have fully buried. And you definitely do not risk your current relationship for something that no longer carries emotional weight. That is why his attempt to sound reasonable only makes things worse. He says his ex was important to him. He says she had been there for him. Then he goes further and admits their relationship did not end because the love was gone. It ended because they could not make the future work. That detail changes everything. Because now this is not about a random ex from ancient history reaching out one time. This is about an old emotional attachment that never fully died, still sitting in the background while Trisha is being asked to trust, commit, and move forward. And this is where late truth stops looking honest and starts looking strategic. When someone hides something until exposure feels likely, then suddenly starts speaking in partial truths. That is not integrity, that is image control. It is a way of releasing enough truth to seem sincere without admitting the full depth of the betrayal. So while Trisha was building toward a future, meeting him with real investment and real hope, Rick was still emotionally facing backward, and that split is where the relationship was already starting to rot. This is the point where the story stops feeling like plain heartbreak and starts feeling humiliating. Because Trisha was not standing in some vague situationship with loose promises and blurry rules, she was standing inside something being sold to her as serious, future-facing, and emotionally real. Family had entered the picture. Children had entered the picture. The language of commitment had entered the picture. And once those things are on the table, the standard changes. You are no longer dealing with a man who made one messy mistake in a fragile connection. You are dealing with a man who kept speaking the language of partnership while still protecting an emotional tie that had no business surviving in the background. That is what makes this uglier than sadness. Sadness hurts. Humiliation cuts deeper, because it forces you to replay every promise and ask whether you were hearing love or only hearing what kept you in place. Rick keeps describing Trisha in warm, affectionate terms. He talks like she means so much to him. He talks like she changed him. He talks like she is part of the future he wants. But then, his behavior keeps exposing a different priority. He is careful with the ex in ways he is not careful with Trisha. He protects the old bond while asking the current relationship to absorb the damage. And once those two things sit side by side, his words start sounding less romantic and more convenient. That split between language and behavior is the whole wound here. Because if Trisha was good enough for family, good enough for future plans, and good enough for all this emotional talk, then why was she not safe from divided loyalty? Why was she still the one expected to understand, wait, and work through pain she did not create? So when Rick starts saying he wants to fix things and sends out the apology, asking for a chance to meet and talk, it does not land like redemption. It lands like the next test. Because now the question is not whether he can say sorry, the question is whether sorry will cost him anything at all. Then comes the performance of repair, and this part is almost worse because Rick suddenly sounds polished, reflective, and full of feeling. He says sorry. He says there were no excuses. He says Trisha is the best thing in his life. He says he wants to fix what he broke. On paper, those are the right words. In motion, they collapse almost the second he steps into the scene. That is what makes this section so revealing. A polished apology sounds impressive until it has to survive contact with the person who was hurt. Trisha does not greet him like a woman softened by his message. She greets him like a woman whose trust has already been burned through, and Rick seems strangely thrown by that. That reaction tells on him. People who understand the damage they cause do not walk in expecting warmth. They do not mistake a meeting for mercy. They do not confuse access with forgiveness. But Rick moves like a man who thinks getting in the room means he still has a chance to steer the mood, and the coldness on Trisha's side makes clear that she is not there to help him feel better about himself. That is why the contrast works so well here. His language is tidy, but his accountability is flimsy. He starts with apology, then drifts toward explanation. He starts with ownership, then edges back into the kind of phrasing that softens his role. In my opinion, that is the real giveaway. People who want a reset often rush toward tone before they deal with facts. They want the conversation to feel calmer before they have earned calm. Trisha does not let him hide in that fog. She cuts through it with the one thing his whole approach cannot survive: specifics. 4 days passed and he said nothing. The messages were disrespectful. He had time to tell her and chose not to. And the second she pins the conversation to those facts, the whole soft focus apology loses its shine. Because now Rick is no longer speaking in feelings, he is standing in evidence. This is where all the excuses run out and the story gets stripped down to one clean test. Trisha gives Rick a way forward, and it is not vague, cruel, or impossible. She does not ask for a grand speech. She does not ask him to erase the past in one night. She asks for one boundary. Block the ex. Choose one relationship. Close one door so the other one can mean something. That is why this moment matters so much, because for the first time, love is no longer being measured by words, tears, or regret. It is being measured by sacrifice. And the choice is simple. Not easy for him, maybe, but simple. If Trisha is the future, then the ex has to become the past. If he wants trust back, then he has to stop protecting the connection that helped break it. There is no mystery in this, no emotional puzzle. No hidden layer that makes the situation too complicated for a clear answer. One boundary, one decision, one cost. That is all. Which is why his refusal hits so hard. Because once Rick says no, the whole story changes shape. Before this, he still had room to pretend he was conflicted, messy, overwhelmed, or trying in his own weak way. Once the boundary is placed in front of him and he still will not do it, the fog disappears. Now the audience can see the hierarchy clearly. He is willing to let Trisha sit in pain before he is willing to let go of that second emotional thread. He wants the comfort of being wanted by Trisha, but not at the price of shutting the ex out for good. That is the brutal clarity of this session. The issue is no longer confusion. Confusion sounds temporary. This is preference. He prefers keeping that second door alive even when the woman in front of him is telling him exactly what it is costing, and once that truth lands, the relationship stops looking wounded and starts looking finished. At this point, the story gets darker, because the question is no longer whether Rick hurt Trisha. He did. The harder question is whether he even wants the relationship badly enough to save it, or whether he wants to look like a man who tried. That is a much uglier possibility, and it changes how every scene before this starts to read. Because when someone keeps saying, I want to fix this, I want another chance, I want us, but then refuses the one concrete step that would prove those words mean anything, you have to ask whether the effort is real or whether the performance is the point. And to be fair, there are softer readings people might reach for. Maybe he thinks honesty should count in his favor. Maybe he is overwhelmed and emotionally split and too weak to act clearly in the moment. Maybe part of him believes admitting the mess makes him more trustworthy than hiding it. Fine, those are possible readings. But they all crash into the same wall. People who want a future do not protect the backup exit more carefully than the relationship in front of them. That is the part he cannot talk his way around. In my opinion, that is why his behavior starts to look less like confusion and more like positioning. He wants Trisha to be the one who says it is over. He wants her to slam the door so he does not have to own the fact that he kept one foot outside the relationship the whole time. That way, he gets to walk away with a story about how he was honest, emotional, willing to try, and still got rejected. That story is much easier on his ego than the truth, which is that he was asked for one clear act of loyalty and would not give it. So the energy shifts here from outrage into recognition. Trisha is not only dealing with betrayal, she may be dealing with a man who wants innocence without sacrifice and heartbreak without accountability. And once that clicks into place, the confession comes back with even more force than before. Because now it does not sound like a sad truth finally spoken out loud. It sounds like a hammer. I'm in love with you, but I do still have feelings for her too. This is where the story stops wobbling and lands on a verdict. Trisha says the one line that cuts through all the excuses, all the speeches, all the fake softness, and she does it without shouting, without begging, without turning it into theater. I asked him to choose, and he made a choice. That is the sentence that settles everything, because it takes the whole mess and reduces it to the only part that matters. He was given clarity. He was given a path. He was given the chance to prove which relationship was real. And when the moment came, his answer was not hidden in poetry or confusion. His answer was in what he refused to do. That is why Rick's next move feels so slippery. He tries to repackage divided loyalty as honesty, Like the problem is not the split itself, but whether he admitted it out loud. But selective honesty is one of the oldest tricks in damaged relationships. A person tells enough truth to feel noble while still avoiding the full cost of what the truth should require. Rick wants points for saying he still has feelings for his ex, but he does not want the consequence attached to that sentence, which is that Trisha now has every reason to stop treating him like a safe future. And this is where the difference between honesty and accountability gets brutally clear. Honesty says, I still have feelings. Accountability says, because I still have feelings, I understand why you cannot trust me and I accept what that means. Rick wants the first part. He fights the second. He wants to be seen as sincere while still being allowed to stay emotionally central in Trisha's life. That is not truth with integrity. That is truth used like a shield. You can feel Trisha starting to see the deeper insult now. Staying would not mean fighting for love. Staying would mean accepting a role she never agreed to play. It would mean becoming the woman who stands there, hears the truth, sees the split, and still volunteers to live in second place. And once that realization starts settling in, the ending is no longer about whether Rick loves her at all. It is about whether loving her ever came with choosing her fully. Rick is still talking like someone who believes he has room to negotiate. He says he is willing to try, willing to make it work, willing to keep the connection alive, and even there you can hear the problem. He still thinks access is on the table. He still thinks contact belongs to him. He still thinks the relationship can sit in this half-dead state where he keeps emotional reach while giving Trisha none of the safety she asked for. That illusion survives right up until she says she will block him everywhere. And that is the second the balance of power changes. Because now the door is not drifting closed on its own. Now Trisha is closing it. And the moment she does, Rick starts coming apart in a way he did not when she was crying, doubting, or asking him to prove himself. That contrast says more than any speech he gave. He was calm enough while he thought some version of access would remain. He could survive her hurt. He could survive her anger. What he could not handle was her withdrawal. What he could not handle was the idea that he would no longer be able to reach in, explain, soften, circle back, or keep himself emotionally present in her life. That is why the phone moment matters, and it should be read carefully. The focus is not cheap drama. The focus is control. The second she starts blocking him in real time, his panic spikes because this is no longer about feelings in the abstract. This is consequence with a shape. This is what a closed door looks like. And for a man who seemed determined to keep one door open with his ex and another one cracked with Trisha, that kind of finality is unbearable. The emotional reversal is almost startling. Trisha, who had every reason to fall apart, looks steadier than expected. Rick, who spent so much time acting like he could manage the situation, looks far shakier than expected. And in that reversal, the audience can finally see who was bargaining for comfort and who was finally done paying for it. So no, this relationship did not die only when Rick admitted he still had feelings for his ex. That was the sentence that exposed the truth, not the moment that created it. The collapse had been building through every failed test before that, through the secrecy, through the delay, through the excuse making, through the warm promises that never matched the behavior, through the apology that sounded polished until it had to face facts, through the simple boundary he refused to honor when honoring it would have cost him something real. That is the clearest reading of the whole story. Rick wanted the comfort, forgiveness, and emotional security of commitment without giving commitment its most basic requirement, a clean choice. He wanted Trisha to trust him while he kept part of himself elsewhere. He wanted credit for honesty after respect had already been damaged. He wanted to stay central in her life without doing the one thing that would have made that place feel safe. Trisha's ending matters because she finally stops arguing against her own value. She stops trying to make sense of what should have been obvious in action. She stops treating divided loyalty like a painful phase that love might fix. And once she does that, the whole story shifts from heartbreak to clarity. Pain is still there, but confusion is gone. That is why the ending works. It is not loud, it is clean. A man showed over and over what he was willing to protect. A woman finally believed him. And on this franchise, that pattern shows up again and again. because the breakup scene is almost never where the breakup starts. It starts the first time someone says I love you and treats commitment like a setting they can switch on and off.